it's meaningless to throw a bunch of numbers in front of the board. They're not going to understand that. But if you say, here is a simple way that I'm measuring how we're getting better at eliminating risks from the environment, that's a meaningful conversation.
You are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity, where we answer your questions and simplify information security for small businesses. Get the clarity you need to focus on the things that matter.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. I'm Accidental CISO, and this is the Mindful Business Security Show. It's often said that what gets measured gets managed. It's one of those sayings that's truthy. It seems like a true statement, and it's true enough to make the point that folks are trying to make with it, even when it isn't categorically true. The idea is that if you want to manage something, you need to have some way to measure it as an input into your management processes. In this episode, we're going to talk about measuring cybersecurity programs in a small business context. If you aren't already subscribed, please take a moment and do that now so you never miss an episode. You should be able to find us in your favorite podcast app. My guest today is a former childhood hacker turned cybersecurity professional, leader, speaker, and published author. Blending her deep technical expertise with sharp business acumen, she's taken her passion for hacking and turned it into a successful 28-year career in the industry. Today, she is the Chief Information Security Officer of a multi-billion-dollar global supplier of legal products and services. She serves on the board of Epiphany Solutions Group and Blue Team Con, one of my favorite industry conferences, by the way. And her book, The Cybersecurity Career Guide, is the textbook for folks looking to begin or advance their careers in cyber. I'm excited to have you join me. Welcome to the show, Alyssa Miller.
Hey, how's it going?
It is going well. I am thrilled to have you here. We've known each other for several years now in the industry, and I'm glad to finally have a chance to get you on the show. I know we've talked about it in the past, and it's finally happening.
Yeah, this is exciting.
Before we dive into the topic of measuring security programs, I want to talk a little bit about your book.
Okay.
With your broad expertise, like you could have picked any number of cybersecurity related topics to write about. Is there a story kind of behind your decision to write this book specifically?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that kind of went into that topic decision, I guess you could call it. I mean, first of all, was just I really wanted to make sure that if I was going to spend the time to write a book, I put something out there that would be positively impactful for people, right? And I feel like, and that's not to say that, technical books on very deep, cybersecurity topics aren't impactful to people. They absolutely are. But it all stemmed from me sort of noticing a disconnect in how the media and everybody were talking about this cybersecurity talent shortage, blah, 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 blah. But I'm talking to a bunch of people who, graduates from cybersecurity programs or people who are working in IT and wanted to pivot and they couldn't figure out how to get jobs, right? It wasn't working out. And so I figured that was like a problem I really wanted to tackle. I did some research, ended up doing like a TEDx talk on it and decided, all right, that makes sense for that to be the topic for a book. Well, then I started looking at it, and the other thing that sort of played into this was as I was looking at what was available for books on the market on this topic, what I saw was that I couldn't find a book that really talked about like how to develop yourself, how to know yourself, how to choose, just the mechanics even of interviewing for a job in cybersecurity. Everything was focused on, well, you need this training, you should build, there were exercises on, building labs and how to do different hacking things and all this stuff, but nothing that really got into like the meat and potatoes of here's how you go from, being in this non-cybersecurity aligned role, whatever that is, all the way to winning the interview and then having longevity in your career, right? And that was what I wanted to address. So, I feel like it was pretty unique at the time. I think I've seen one or two titles come out since that kind of have gone a little bit closer to that pattern now. But that was really where I was wanting to go.
It's a fantastic, fantastic book. I've actually bought multiple copies to gift to folks in some of the mentoring that I've been
Oh,
doing.
well, I appreciate
So
that.
yeah, yes, it is very, very good. I hope that the folks that I've given it to have found it as helpful as I think they do. I haven't followed back with them to ask that specific question, but I know that they've found jobs and
Good.
made successful pivots into cybersecurity from other fields. So I suspect that there was some help there.
I hope so. But I mean, either way, I'm just glad they got into the industry, right? Like that's what
Yes.
matters.
Where can folks find a copy if they want to buy it for themselves or buy a copy to give to somebody else?
Sure.
Is there a place that's best to get it?
You can go to just alyssa.link/book, and that will take you to Manning Publications website where you can buy the book. It'll take you right to that page. Otherwise, I mean, any of your major book retailers have it.
Okay.
Obviously, the big one owned by that Bezos dude, you can get it out there. There's options, but yeah, I mean, pretty much everywhere. I
Okay.
think it was even available at some just like regular retailers for a while.
I just like to drive folks to the place where the actual creator gets the most benefit.
Yeah, for me, I get the most if it's if you buy it straight through Manning. But again, that's
Okay.
really not my concern. I mean, I didn't write a book to get royalties. Trust me, you don't get rich writing a book.
So switching gears just a little
Yeah,
bit, a lot of folks that are, looking to get into cybersecurity, like they see it as a technical thing. A lot of them see like the CISO role as the pinnacle uh, of security and all that. And it's very much an operational discipline. But I think a lot of what folks sometimes miss with security too is it's also got to be strategically aligned with the business. And as a CISO, we've got to live in both of those worlds. How does that dual reality kind of affect your approach to managing security programs?
well, so step one is getting away from the idea of thinking of them as two separate worlds, right? And I think this is a big thing. And you touched on it at the beginning, but it is a huge thing that I think a lot of CISOs miss. You strap on that C title, whether it was an intentional goal of yours or you accidentally end up with it, you strap on that C title. Hi, you are now part of the business. You don't get to say, oh, the business did this, the business did that. No, you are part of it. And that's your job as any executive in any company. Once you become an executive, I don't care big or small, how big that company is, your job is the success of the business. Yes, your job as a CISO, you are the lead of the cybersecurity efforts of that organization, right? Your responsibility to make sure they are safe. But you are ultimately responsible for the success of the business as a whole. I mean, we don't look at CFOs and say, well, I just manage the books and the bank accounts, you guys just do all the rest. No, they're intimately involved. Think about, perfect examples, think about like an M&A activity. Who gets involved? Everybody. Your CISO, your CTO, your CIOs, all of them, everybody, the CFO, everybody's involved in that because it's a business. The executive team is about running the business. So I think for me, that's like a key thing that often gets missed when we talk about strategically aligning with the business. Well, you are part of the business. So yeah, the things that you're choosing to do from a strategic perspective, whatever that strategy is going to be, it is part of what the business is trying to do to be successful.
I've said in many past episodes, security only exists within the context of the business.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's there to serve the business. Without the business, security doesn't matter because there's no business to secure.
Yeah, I mean, no one starts a company to say, I'm going to build a bunch of IT infrastructure and secure it, and that's my business model. Well, no. I'm in business to make money. Everybody who gets in the business is there to make money. So
Yep.
at the end of the day, it may sound raw and awful, but that's the reality. At least in the capitalist society, that's how it works.
Yeah, a lot of folks too will come up into security leadership roles from technical roles, not as
Mhm.
career business folks in business roles. Generally, they've been promoted up to the executive levels, and they've got to start learning the business side of things, and they have to start translating the technical to the business. And I think that's really where we start getting into the conversation around measuring security programs. That sort of think is measuring the program. A big piece of that is just understanding the different vocabulary and the different ways things need to be framed and the different information that the
Hmm.
folks in leadership, for instance, need to receive in order to have the information that they need to make decisions. And in your career, you've had the opportunity to both report to the board as a CISO as well as sit on boards. When you stepped into that board member role for the first time, like was there like an aha moment or anything that surprised you that you hadn't considered before or anything like once you were in that spot?
I mean, I think some of it was actually some of that same realization, right? That I was there as a board member to help the company ultimately be successful. Yes, my focus being from cybersecurity, I joined as someone they were looking to bring more of that cybersecurity context and expertise. But the reality was, I was a part of that board as well, and I am a part of that board because I understand how to turn cybersecurity into a business enabling, revenue enabling practice, and that's again something I think gets missed a lot. We talk about cybersecurity being cost center, and God, I think we've been talking about that my entire life, right? Oh, the information security team doesn't drive revenue; they're a cost center. Well, yeah, but everything that we do, A, ensures the success of the business, B, has the ability to potentially augment or even generate revenue and ultimately demonstrate value of our organization to the market. And the really smart ones can figure out how to actually make it a differentiator. And so, in a board perspective, it was a lot of the same. It's realizing that my role wasn't just to sit there and talk about, emerging cybersecurity technologies that they might want to partner with. It was, let's talk about what you're doing from a business strategy perspective. Where are you going now? Based on that, what partnerships are going to fit the best? Who can we look at that's emerging in the space? What do we do with VCs and other things like that who might also be partnerships? Maybe it's not just directly with the startups or the organizations that are pumping out cybersecurity solutions. Maybe it's those investors who are creating and incubating and driving those various organizations as well. So I think the more I started to realize that, the more I would literally say I got more actively engaged as a board member and felt like I was more a part of the business as opposed to just someone who is there sort of advising and overseeing.
Do you find that the active engagement includes coaching the rest of the board about like what they should be thinking about, the questions they should be asking, the relevant information that they should want to know regarding security?
I would say the relevant information. I don't look to them to ask a lot of the questions because that I do kind of feel is my role as being the cybersecurity person. So if I'm going to talk about, if we're going to talk cybersecurity questions, that's what I should be bringing to the table. But I want them to understand, why do they care, right? That's the thing. So not so much I want them to figure out how to ask smart questions. Why bother? They're there because their expertise is whatever it is. And granted, the organization I'm in, there's a couple cybersecurity resources on the board, so that helps too. But even for the ones who aren't, it's more, here's why we care about this. Here's what our portion of the industry in terms of cybersecurity versus maybe storage versus infrastructure, whatever. This is what cybersecurity is kind of headed toward in a direction, bringing that level of knowledge. And here's why you care, because here's what's growing that could be valuable to the business. Here's where that market's shrinking that we don't want to tackle because it wouldn't be strategically valuable. Here's something that's emerging we can focus on that would put us out there as an innovative leader. That's what I want to educate the rest of the board on, as well as obviously the business leaders.
The listeners of the show are generally small business owners, so they may not
Mhm.
have a board of directors because they're in very small orgs. So they sort of are. It should be the owner of the business, like they're their own kind of board of directors sometimes as
Mhm.
well. Are there any? key questions or things like that that small business owners should be asking, I suppose asking of themselves about security to make sure that they're approaching security in a way to effectively make strategic decisions to sort of get at what are the things that we'll need to measure?
Yeah, so I mean, again, it comes back to let's talk about it. All starts with what's the business strategy? Where are we trying to go? And then it's almost, to put it in cybersecurity terms, it becomes like a threat model, right? It's looking at this, all right, this is my strategy. What are the things I need to be thinking about in terms of where do I need to defend? What do I want to be looking at? Or what do I need security to enable for me? For instance, if I'm, creating something that's going to, I'm going to create some type of external presence at a consumer level, right? I want to understand what are the components I need to be thinking about? Why is that different than a B2B scenario? Launching things like websites are one thing, but launching full-on interactive SaaS products or things of that nature is something else. And when you expand from doing business with other businesses with whom you contract versus doing business with consumers where they're essentially anonymous to you is a big change. And being able to analyze that, and sometimes it is just recognize, I don't even know what I need to do here, so maybe I need to talk to somebody. I think that is the biggest thing is just leading with that. And then the other part of it, of course, and we talk about this all the time in cybersecurity, so this seems basic, but it's still the thing that gets missed is just consider that business model. What is critical to you? What are those, we use that, I'm going to use a yucky term I don't like, but crown jewels, right? That you hear that tossed about quite a bit. The reality of that is, though, truly, what are those things? What is most critical to your business? Because that's where you want to start thinking first in terms of, all right, what do I need to do to keep that information safe or keep those assets safe or whatever it is? What do I need to do to protect the resiliency of that critical service that if it goes away, my customers are going to abandon me? That's what, as a small business leader, you really have to be thinking about. And I think because it feels like it should be so obvious that even when confronted with the question, a lot of times business leaders won't really sit down and internalize that question and analyze it. They just, well, I know it's important to me. It's this, this, this. Well, did you really sit down and think about that? Did you walk through the potential failure scenarios, we'll call them, where one of those elements disappears? Then what? Right? Or what about this thing that you're not thinking about? Is your HR system critical to you? A lot of times you're thinking about stuff that's related strictly to your business model, but what about these other things that especially if like you're doing something where you're hiring a lot of contractors or something and that HR system goes away and now suddenly you can't, interface with that hiring process to bring in new contractors. What does that do to you? Right? All of those types of things, they're the types of things that get missed.
I was just thinking one of the things I mentioned earlier about sort of that dual world between the tactical and the strategic. A lot of security folks, like we have a lot of data points
Mm-hmm.
in the things that we can measure or use in our measurements. But when it comes to actually turning that into usable information that somebody can use to make decisions, do you have any tips for business owners or business leaders who are trying to understand how do I take all of this information that I could potentially be reporting up the chain and turn that into something that is actionable? Like, is there a certain techniques to framing it, or ways that you kind of analyze it, or ways that you try to package it up to
Mm-hmm.
make it more useful?
So there's two directions you go with this, and this is what I coach my team when we're putting together any form of metrics for reporting, right? And there's two ways to look at metrics. One, you can define the metrics and let them tell you the story, right? You have all this data at your disposal, but it's all disparate and whatever. So maybe you spend some time correlating that data together and you see a story start to emerge, right? It could be one of our common ones is measuring age of vulnerabilities in the environment, right? I think that's kind of like a table stakes one that a lot of people follow. But when you look at that and you start to see, okay, most of my critical vulnerabilities are ones that are more than 90 days old versus if they're falling into your less than 30s. Well, your less than 30s, those are new. Okay, so we're doing a good job, we're tackling them. But if they're sitting in that 90-day plus, wow, we've got a problem. We're not addressing them fast enough. So you can let that, the data tell you that story. The other way is to set out and say, and this is the one where it ties closer to business strategies, is say, what's the story I want to be able to tell? And now what are the data points I need to gather to tell me if that story is occurring or not, right? So that might be something like, hey, we've implemented, some whiz bang technology that, from a cybersecurity perspective as part of this product. And let's say, let me think of a good example. So I throw in Cloudflare, right? We'll use that, or any, Akamai, just to be fair to the two major competitors in that space, right? Or any of the others that do the same kinds of things. It was like CDNs, and they bring all the other value as that front layer to your environment. Okay, so if you're bringing that in because, hey, you're launching some big new web-based interface, whether it's for customers that are consumers or customers that are businesses, you're looking at that and you're saying, well, how do I want to measure what that's doing for me? And I want to be able to show that, yeah, I'm actively defending against, bots and fraudulent users coming into my site. Well, now I want to look at, all right, what are the metrics that are going to tell that story? And that story is going to be how many managed challenges did we force and how many successfully completed them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because now that's tying back to my business goal of making sure that this site is not being subjected to fraudulent activity from bots or whomever. And that's where the connection comes now to the business strategy, right? So I've launched this thing and it's only going to be successful if I can keep that fraudulent or that bot activity out. And so here's how I'm going to measure it. So I think you can approach it either way. And in reality, you end up doing some of both. But always, always, always the key with any metric, any KPI is what is the story you're trying to tell? However you're going to present it, it's got to be obvious to the consumer of that information that this is the story here. This is what these numbers are telling me.
The takeaway that I'm hearing, to distill that down and tell me if I'm processing this correctly, is you've got a story that you're telling to the senior leadership, the raw information, and your example of the number of critical vulnerabilities and how old they are. That's just noise if you give it to them. But in that story, the story is, we established that we are going to set an expectation that we are going to patch within certain timeframes, and that the processes are going to work a certain way. And we have a certain service level sort of agreement or expectation with the board. And now your story is, our security program, our processes and protocols are functioning, and we are meeting that expected service level. And ultimately, it sounds like that's really what the leadership wants to hear.
Right.
Like, they don't care about the raw numbers. It's that story of, we've set this expectation and here's how we're performing against it. And, we are meeting that expectation by summarizing it that way for them.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect way to look at it. It's about the trending, right? When we think about so many cybersecurity products and things, it's more about the trending than the numbers. So if I'm looking, we'll continue with the vulnerability story for a minute. If I'm continuing, if I'm looking at raw numbers of vulnerabilities, I'm saying we have this many highs, this many mediums, this many lows. That doesn't mean anything to anybody, right? Is that good or bad? Who knows? Well, so now I start to look at the age. How quickly are we fixing them? Well, okay, a lot of them are going out to 90 days. Well, that starts to tell more of a story, to your point, because now it's like, all right, well, we know that if we're addressing them quickly, we're keeping our stuff safe. If these things are existing for long periods of time, if they're more than a year old and we still have these CVEs sitting out there, those are the types of things that are most likely to get popped. Well, that's a different story. And now where that gets even better is how does that graph change month to month? Am I getting better and we're reducing the number that are more than 90 days old, or is that number growing? And maybe there's a problem either in how we're working with the various owners of those systems to get things patched or whatever, or is it maybe that the vulnerability management team itself needs additional resource to help work with those system owners to get those things fixed, right? That's where now the rubber meets the road, because it's meaningless to throw a bunch of numbers in front of the board. They're not going to understand that. But if you say, here is a simple way that I'm measuring how we're getting better at eliminating risks from the environment, that's a meaningful conversation. But here's where it really started to stick for me. And what really brought me to that conclusion was sitting in a meeting. I got the infamous question from a board member. And this question gets asked so often by especially people who are, board members who are really interested in understanding, or even executives who are really interested in understanding, but don't know how to ask the right questions. So how many attacks do we see per month? Well, okay, let's pick that apart, right? Holy cow. First of all, how do you define an attack? And then, okay, so let's say we pick some random definition of what constitutes an attack. Well, now, if that number is in the tens of thousands, well, is that good or bad? How do we know? There's no numbers in the industry to say, well, if you see, 15 attempts per asset, that's good or bad. No, it doesn't matter. So what I coached that board member was, look, I'm not going to give you that number because it's pointless. What I am going to show you is our time that it takes to detect those and our time that it takes to investigate and complete that investigation, because that's what you care about. And I will be able to break that down into how many of those were automated responses that immediately blocked something versus something where the team had to do something additional. And then we'll track those measurements on a month-to-month trending basis. I'll give you a 6-month trend. That will give you what you're actually asking for, which is, can I feel reasonably comfortable that we're safe and we're, stopping attacks that are coming in against us? Because that's what they care about. It doesn't matter how many times you see a port scan or you see, somebody poking at a port. What matters is, are they getting in? That's what they care about.
Are they getting in, and is the organization able to do what they need to do to respond and deal with that within those agreed upon service level timeframes?
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. I think that's something that's a lot of security practitioners struggle with, but I think also a lot of business owners who are starting to be new to security, like they look at the dashboards and their tools and it's all these raw numbers, and it can be very overwhelming. And it's just to take that step back and think less about the raw numbers and what do they mean? What's the trend?
Well, you just touched on one of my pet peeves with the cybersecurity solution market, right? I have so many solutions out there that I can point my finger at who claim to give you visibility, but the problem is they give you only visibility, right? I mean, you can see all the stuff and they'll tell you about it all, but no one wants to take it to the next step and tell you what you should actually do about it, right? Or if they do, it's really kind of weak, lame, high level, idealistic, do this, do that, whatever. It's never really something that is contextualized and actionable within your organization. If anybody thinking about building a cybersecurity solution really, really wants to make an impact in the market, that's where it's got to be focused. Visibility, table stakes, as far as I'm concerned. 100 different products can give me visibility. But it's when I can take that data, I can correlate it, I can turn it into an action, and I can say, within my organization, this is what fits. And you're talking about wrapping that all together. That's what's going to matter.
That's when it becomes really impactful. One last question here before we get to the callers.
Mm-hmm.
If you had a magic wand and you could wave this magic wand in the air and instantly have every small business owner or small business leader understand something about security, what would that one thing be?
I think that understanding of cybersecurity doesn't have to be a thing that inhibits your innovation or is going to, introduce friction within your organization. when you build with cybersecurity in mind, and just it's the same way that you think about the infrastructure, what infrastructure you need to be successful with that product, what financials you need in place, how much investment do we have to make, what marketing do I need in place. When you look at cybersecurity that same way, as it's just part of the necessary pieces of going to market, that's when it starts to become less about friction and more about just integration into what you're building. And it actually, believe it or not, and I could go on for hours about this, it can actually and should actually drive your innovation to move quicker.
I love asking this question because everybody has such drastically different answers, and that is so well said. So we've got callers waiting for us here to ask some questions and get some help. Are you ready to go to the phones and take some questions from callers?
So you're telling me we're dropping the safety line now and I'm on my own. All right, here we go.
Awesome. Let's go.
Do the cybersecurity risks to your business have you confused? Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast and sign up to be a caller on a future episode.
Our first caller on the show today is Mike from Arizona. Hey, Mike, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. How can we help you?
Great to be here. Thank you. So one of the questions I've got is, how do you test and assess a team inside a small organization and not create this perspective of fear?
Ooh, so this is a great question because, first of all, I can't stand leading with the fear story, right? Like we do a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We call it FUD, right? And we see it all the time. So I think that the way that I do it, and when you say testing a team, I'm not sure if you mean specifically like from a phishing. That's a common one that we like to do a lot, right? We send these phishing emails. What I try to do in our organization is I try to point out a couple key aspects. One, I want it to be a learning experience, right? So yes, these are based on potential things you might see that would be attacks against our organization. But if all I do is send out, say, a phishing test, and I get mad at the people who clicked on the link, what have I done? I've done exactly what you said. I've gotten a bunch of people scared. They're afraid to touch their email. One of my big focuses is follow up that campaign with communications to all that talk about what was in there, talk about why did you choose that particular campaign. Well, hey, we're seeing this is something related to, maybe we're seeing a lot of business email compromise attempts to get wire transfers or something, right? Bring that to the whole group, even everybody who managed to report it correctly, or at least they deleted it, bring it to all of them and say, here were the warning signs that were in the email. Here's how you could have detected this. And then the other thing I really like to do is tie it to their private lives and say, hey, you might see similar things like this, similar warning signs in emails you receive at home that also might be trying to do this to you. So understand. And so we do that a lot with any type of awareness or validation campaign, whether we're doing a purple teaming thing or a phishing example like that. It's always about making sure that everybody that was part of that target group gets the opportunity to learn from it, even if they took the desired actions.
That's really brilliant. I had never considered tying in the additional educational component of this is why we picked the campaigns with them and sort of the current events and what's going on around the industry or in the world that would potentially make them that campaign be timely. I hadn't considered that.
Well, and it removes the uncertainty, right? That's the thing. The fear comes with the uncertainty. I don't really understand why this is a big deal, but I'm really scared about it because now you're telling me that we're going to get hacked or whatever. But if you say, hey, this is what we see attackers doing. Right now we're seeing this increase in attackers sending fraudulent invoices, going back to that BEC example. They're sending fraudulent invoices with false or with incorrect banking information. Now people understand that, right? And so now it's like, oh, okay, well, now I can understand how I would combat that in my head. And that takes a lot of the fear out of it.
And if those messages get to people's mailboxes, they've obviously gotten through the initial defenses that are trying to filter out the
Right.
obvious stuff. And so like now the people are part of the reporting mechanism.
Mhm.
So the piece that I like to use with phishing training is my training working well? Like, did my people report it? Is our reporting trend going up? Are more people catching them and reporting them from month to month or exercise to exercise, depending on what cadence it is? And those who didn't, why didn't it? Was it because they didn't know? Like, this is a huge opportunity to improve the training. And instead of framing it as, oh, you click this link, you're in trouble, we got to do remedial training. I mean, we know we can trick people to do anything. People make websites that are legit. They can make websites that are, fake that look legit just as easily. Like that's not the goal in my mind. And from a fear perspective, I think focusing purely on, we're trying to improve our training and making sure that everybody knows what to do when they see it. They can identify it, but also they know how to report it so that then, the IT folks or whoever can go back in and like pull it out of people's mailboxes for the people who haven't opened their mail yet, then they don't even have to see it.
Yeah, I mean, think about what your goals are here, right? Your goal isn't just to test the efficacy of people's mindsets and make sure that they're going to catch us. It's to educate them, right? I mean, you've got this campaign, you're doing this thing. If all you're doing is it's a gotcha where if you click it, you're in trouble, or you have to do training and that's all you get out of it, you're wasting so much potential there in the opportunity to actually get people to understand it, and learn from it. QR code phishing was a great one for us, a great example of this. It was like, these people weren't really seeing it. They never thought about QR codes as an issue until we did a phishing campaign. And now it was like, oh, yeah, these are something, it wasn't just, hey, let's make this bad. It was a follow up communication of here's why this could be problematic. And now you've seen it firsthand. So if they know that they're learning, that it's a training thing, not an overwatch to make sure that you're doing the right stuff, that makes it more collaborative and again removes a lot of that fear factor.
Yeah, and I really like the tie-in too about what happens at home. Just on this education side about it's both here and at home.
I mean, you want your people to be safe at home too, because honestly, if they get breached at home, that's going to have all sorts of impact to your business too.
The other question I had is when it comes to going out to market, and you mentioned it a little bit about the not creating friction and creating opportunities for growth inside the business. How can security hygiene or a view towards security help me as a small business owner promote my business? What's the benefit of having a security hygiene inside the business, and how's the market responding to that these days?
It depends on how you want to look at it. Is it typically a thing you're going to be able to like market like, oh God, we're the safest option. Please God, don't do that. It lacks credibility. And it just makes you a target, right? And I can name examples. I remember sitting years ago at Black Hat and I was working in the booth for my company, and the company across the way had this scrolling marquee that said "Become unhackable." And I'm like, wow, good way to put yourself out of business because that'll do it. But here's what it does for you, right? Good security hygiene, first of all, takes away a lot of the distractions that come after you go to market. So you go to market and this is going to be a really tactical example, but you go to market with some SaaS product and people start using it and they start identifying security flaws in it. Well, now suddenly you're going back and your engineering time is getting spent on that. There's probably also some reputational risk there, maybe if that word spreads or whatever. But that's just that's just a core cost right there, right? I mean, that is a tangible cost of I have to distract certain developers who I want working on the latest and greatest to now go back and fix something they created that had this security flaw. Whereas if I've got a strong and since we're talking software, so if I've got a strong, mature CI/CD pipeline where the security practices are built into that, and I know I'm catching the security flaws on the way, before they go out the door, and or I've got mitigations in place out there in front of my solutions that at least buy me time. Now I have options, I have ways to mitigate the costs of that, or I'm not introducing the costs in the first place. And so that's a big deal, because now it also makes you, not only are you saving money, you're more responsive in terms of feature set. So that's the software business. Where it helps in other businesses is really around being able to just demonstrate your expertise in that space when you do talk about it in the marketplace. Especially if you're a B2B business, your customers are going to be asking. They're going to be asking, what's your security program all about? In fact, when you're a small business, they're going to ask more than they do the big businesses. And they're going to be asking those questions. And when you can confidently come to the table and say, this is what we do this, this is our strategy for cybersecurity, and you're able to lay that out, and you're not like having to ask them 20 questions to understand what it is that they're asking about, because you've already got it in place. Well, that's helping you win business. At the end of the day, that's going to help you win business, because now that builds a confidence factor in them that you're on top of it. The hardest place to drive, honestly, that differentiation is in the consumer market. If you're marketing to consumers, it is harder to use cybersecurity as a differentiator, because quite honestly, consumers, A, are unaware, and B, they're apathetic. They're not asking those questions. They're not demanding that level from their vendors most often. Some do. Obviously, there are some, and there are some who want to know. But that's where, again, being able to not be distracted financially and resource-wise on, going back and fixing security flaws does allow you to respond to their needs a little faster.
And I think there may be an unfortunate C in that list of consumers who just assume that security is all taken care of, and that, they're a SaaS provider. They obviously know what they're doing. That's their job. And they don't bother to think or question it as well.
Yeah.
But how fast you can fix things, I think, is a great metric, because as business leaders, you can measure that. How fast do we take not just feature requests, but bugs and security vulnerabilities? How fast are we able to process those through our software development lifecycle and get those fixes out and into production? And if that time is longer than you feel you want to have, this may be a negotiation with the teams who actually have to do that work to understand what it really takes to do it. Because the other piece of that, you got to have time to validate those fixes. You can't just sling them out the door. You do need to test and validate. So it takes a little bit of time and effort to make the fix, and then make sure the fix fixes it and doesn't introduce another thing to fix after that, and destabilize things. The other thing you can look at to help give your customers confidence during the sales cycle, especially, the faster you're able to answer their questions, especially in a B2B environment about security, to enable your sales folks, your customer facing folks, with information about the security program, to be able to provide that on demand. That gives the customers a lot of confidence that you've got things handled, because your sales folks don't have to say, well, let me go find out and give me a week or 2 weeks. They can immediately turn around same day, because they've been given resources to hand to customers with instructions on what can be given pre-NDA and post-NDA potentially. But that gives a lot of confidence, because they're ready with it. Like the organizations, it's obvious, has already thought through it. And then the other thing you can measure is, how long does the organization spend during the sales cycle on security related vendor risk things for the customer? You can look at that trend of how much have we shortened that over time to streamline that process. And that's another area where security can help drive revenue, by helping enable the sales team with knowledge and information to give the customer confidence and make sure that they've got everything they need to just fly through that process and get the sale closed.
And think about that, now in a competitive situation, right? So if you're in talks with someone who's talking to 2 other competitors, and you're the first one back with those answers, or they got half the answers from your initial sales presentation, versus those, your competitors who are now going back and circling the wagons with their security teams or whatever, trying to answer those questions. I mean, just think about how that plays in a competitive situation, that you were there, you had it, and you were ready to go. how long are they going to wait for the competitors to get the answers, or do they maybe just start to shade toward you in the first place?
Well, thanks for coming on the show, Mike. I hope this was helpful.
It was awesome. Thank you very much for having me.
Our next caller on the show today is Jack from Indianapolis. Hey, Jack, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on to ask questions. How can we help you?
Well, I was wondering, I do some work for a nonprofit, and one of the things that I was wondering the other day was, you know, when you think about measuring security programs, especially as we in small business use a lot of third parties, how do you measure your IT MSP or security MSP? And especially what indicators do you pay attention to figure out, when it's time to address something or maybe even move on to someone else?
Sure. So I've got lots of ideas. This might shock you. But obviously the table stakes elements are things like their time to detect, all time to respond, time to escalate, all the random SLA measures that you'll see in the contract, right? I mean that just watching the trends on those is always crucial. But if you really want to understand if they are bringing value to you, what I look at are things like what are they helping in terms of what are they creating in terms of customized playbooks? Are they automating my playbooks, right? So how much of my incident playbooks are actually in automation within the tooling either on my side or their side? A lot of them will claim to bring a lot of that to the table, but if all they're bringing you is the out of box set that they kind of resell to everybody, you're probably not getting as much value as you would get out of an MSP who actually understands your business, understands your environment, and is able to craft custom, whether it's automations, detection rules, playbooks, whatever. That's what I'm always looking at. I'm looking at what are they doing that's enabling that. The other thing I like to measure is the time that the actual handoff takes, right? So if they're escalating to me or to my team because they've gotten to the end of the rope with their investigation and they need more information from us or whatever, just even how is that effectively happening? Does it take 2 hours from the time they escalate to the time we get engaged and can respond to them? That type of thing is actually really, really important in measuring how well they're dealing. The last piece that I look at with my MSPs always, 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 always is how committed are they? And this isn't really a measure per se, but it's more of a, it's subjective, but how committed are they to our business reviews? Are we doing monthly ops reviews? Are we getting our quarterly business reviews? Are we doing an annual executive briefing? If they're doing those things, I feel really good. If those things are kind of slipping or they feel like they're just kind of going through the motions, knocking those out, that's a concern for me because that's an opportunity where they should be bringing things to me that I need to know about. They should be bringing to me a higher level executive view of the threat intel that they have from the past month, quarter, or year, right? Where are they seeing trends in the market? What is their strategy? And what are they bringing to the table in terms of improvement recommendations?
Kind of beyond the SLA, kind of almost generating a scorecard of your own to kind of set an expectation with them of engagement.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. I mean, again, they should be a partner. They're not a product, right? You hire an MSP, they're a partner. They're supposed to be. And if all they're doing is, working alerts and giving you, call center style stats on, hey, it took us this long to answer the phone. It took us this long to resolve the issue. You really, that's not demonstrating a whole lot of value.
And during the sales process, as you're selecting one, the good MSPs, part of the process, like they should be able to articulate to you how you're going to measure them. those quarterly business reviews and things, like, they should have that process down and be able to tell you exactly what the information they're going to present you in those quarterly business reviews are ahead of time. Like, that should be standard. And if the organization that you're looking at to come offer you their managed services can't tell you, this is how you're going to measure us, like, here's how you should be looking at this to know that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, that should be kind of a red flag not to go with them, because they can't tell you how to measure. And they're obviously not used to being able to report to you. But to Jack, to your question, that you asked, like, having your own scorecard, like, that's the other piece of it, is you also need on your side things that you're looking for how well are they performing. And with managed service providers, stuff that might be on there is onboarding and offboarding efficiency, because those are processes that get messed up a lot because there's handoffs back and forth between the company and the MSP, often at multiple points in that process. And keeping track of how well and how smoothly and how quickly the onboarding process goes and what problems are there, and especially the offboarding process and what problems are there, like, those are two things you want to watch really closely, because those are processes where mistakes are very possibly going to cause security incidents if that process is not functioning as expected. So that's one place to watch. And from a measurement standpoint, just the pure raw number of issues may not be terribly useful, but knowing, like, is it within the bounds of what you'd expect, or is it trending the right way? Like, are they making improvements to get it to where it needs to be?
Yeah, that helps a lot.
Yeah. Awesome. Jack, thank you. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure. Thank you both.
And our last question today is actually a listener mailbag question. Perception can have a significant impact on how something is measured, as well as how that measurement will be interpreted. And sort of with that in mind, Andrew is asking a very apt question here. Andrew from New Jersey writes, security in particular is a fail-only job, in that the company will only notice when there's a problem. No one's ever going to say, wow, great job blocking all that spam today. Or, you really nailed that third-party assessment. Or, why did this get blocked? We need it. You're costing us money. I've tried a few things to get security reviewed in a more positive light, such as engaging directly with employees, making sure our phishing testing is rewards-based instead of punishment-based. We give out gift cards for reporting, most improved teams, and so on. What are some other things that a security team can do to be seen as helpful instead of the Department of No? I love this.
Yes, the infamous Department of No question. So, I mean, first of all, you kind of highlighted one here. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the awareness campaigns and stuff, right? So, you mentioned rewards, and we talked to another caller just a little while ago about turning those into education activities, right? And part of that is just that, making sure it's a communication to everybody and highlighting that. That's something that will get you noticed. Anytime you have the opportunity to put communications out, that's great. And especially when they're not communications about, thou must do this thing, or we're making this change that's going to make you have to MFA every 2 days or whatever. Yeah, obviously, if you can put something out there that's helpful, that's always good. Along those lines, though, those communications opportunities are great ways for you to also spread threat intel. So you're getting maybe some threat intel either through feeds, or you're just doing your own research, or keeping yourself up to speed in the market, whatever. Sharing that trending information can be a huge boon to your organization, and it gets you on a radar, right? So are they going to come back to you all excited, like, whoa, this is the greatest thing ever? Maybe not. But there's a lot of things happening in the world right now that they do want to be aware of. There are things happening, if you're not aware by now, of the fraudulent worker situation we're seeing, with, in particular, actors from North Korea getting hired on as legitimate employees. That's maybe, in that case, it is a cybersecurity thing. But even if not, even if you take what North Korean actors are trying to do in terms of selling access and things of that nature, but even just think about it from the HR perspective, okay, maybe that's not a cybersecurity issue, but how can our cybersecurity tools help? What are the things where we could detect because of some anomalous behavior in our environment somewhere, particularly from an identity perspective? What can I be looking at where now I can start to highlight, hey, these are employees that you didn't vet properly and they're not actually real people, or they're coming from the wrong place or whatever. That gets you noticed, right? And that will get you a, hey, great job identifying that. Some of the other things that you can do here, though, is this goes back to what we've been talking about, I think, the whole way along. How are your measurements tying into the broader story of the business strategy? So, what are you doing? What tooling are you implementing? What protections, whatever, that are defending a new product or service or a new development, or eliminating business level risks from the organization? I mentioned way back towards the beginning of the show about the example I used was a CDN that you have in front, a Cloudflare, Akamai, whatever. And if you're preventing fraudulent activity hitting one of your web-based, SaaS products or whatever it is that you offer, that's something that you can highlight through metrics, and that will get people's attention, because that is something that then potentially has direct financial impact.
The other thing, too, there's the underlying assumption in this question that security is a fail only job and that people only notice when things go wrong. And I think as we look at the organization and how we market ourselves in the organization to others and to leadership, we can change our mindset. And if we look at ourselves as there as part of the team to help and offer our expertise, and what can be measured is, are our processes flowing properly? We talked earlier in the episode about being able to measure your process around how quickly you're getting your security patches out. And are you staying within your defined times for getting software updates out to patch vulnerabilities quickly? But there's more on the business side that you really can also focus on that's very tangible around process improvement. Like we in security can borrow from the safety and quality fields, because tools are going to help facilitate processes. So if we're working with other teams, and instead of being the department of no, we're the department of how about we do it this way? And we could use this tool because we know the system. Security knows the systems within the company. If we know IT has a tool already that can help with something to make something easier, or get them plugged in to work with the right people to automate something, we're going to reduce the potential for problems, for mistakes, because human error often causes issues. But we can make things run more smoothly, which you can point to efficiency, because now the right process is the fast, is the efficient process, is the safe process. There's a lot we can do there. And I think just shifting that focus from they're not going to see our work to realizing that the stuff that we do that's invisible is just a small part of the full impact we really can have on the organization because of our innate understanding of the systems and how they work, how they could be abused, but also how they can be optimized. Alyssa, we've had a couple of callers on the show with really good questions. We had a write-in listener mailbag question as well that was good. Some great conversation around that. Do you have any parting thoughts or any key takeaways that you want to make sure you drive home for the listeners on this topic?
I mean, I'll go back to the top, right? And I think it was one of the first questions you asked me was about, the business side versus the security side. And if there's anything you heard here, I hope that you take away from it that as leaders in an organization, even if you're not a CISO, even if you're not, high level in the organization, understanding that security is part of the business, and that the artificial separation of security as this side thing is exactly what is damaging to us and drives things like being seen as the department no, drives things like, being a fail-only perceived role. We need to get beyond that, right? We need to start to see that everything that the business does needs to see security as inherent to it as the financials, as the marketing, as the legal, as the IT. We are just right in there with them. At the executive level, we're all there, right? We're all the C's that go across the top. So, just as their peers there, their peers in function. And that's what we need to, I think, if there's anything I want to drive home, it's that. And just accepting that as a security leader in particular, you are the business.
That is so, so true. My key takeaway is leaders need to have realistic expectations for their security programs, what they're expecting to see, and sort of define that so that then when you measure your program, you can determine, are we functioning within our expected parameters? And that really is the question. It's not all the noise of the raw data and everything. It comes down to how are we expecting the program to operate, and are we operating within those expected parameters? And hopefully by reframing it this way, and maybe reframing a little bit too with the, security as a business enabler and not just a preventer of bad things that you can never test a negative, like that little mindset shift may help drive that collaboration that you're talking about, Alyssa, in the organization, get the security teams to see themselves differently and get leadership to help security teams see themselves differently as well. It might help with some of the burnout we deal with in our field as well, where, that understanding might actually be one of the keys that needs to happen to help start having security people live a little more healthy professional lives. Alyssa, where can folks find you online if they want to follow up and ask questions or reach out or invite you to come speak or anything like that?
Easiest, honestly, is on Blue Sky. That's probably where I'm most active as far as social media. LinkedIn works, but I'm not nearly as active there. And as I'm sure many can imagine, my personal direct messages on LinkedIn are a nightmare because, you put the word CISO in your profile and suddenly everybody is, sending you marketing messages. You can go to my website. It's woefully out of date, like woefully out of date by years. But there is a contact form on there to get in touch with me. Yeah, I'm not great at keeping it up to date, but that's alyssasec.com. So ALYSSASEC.com.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm glad we were able to finally connect and put this together and coordinate some time. I know we had tried a few times in the last couple of years and just calendars did not cooperate with us. So
I appreciate you having me on for sure.
And thank you to our listeners. We do this for you, and we really appreciate that you're here and listening. And I also want to thank Michael Coburn for the amazing theme music that we use on the show. I am Accidental CISO, and until next time, stay mindful.
Don't miss our next episode. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and follow us on social media. Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast for show information and links to our social media pages. This has been the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity.